On returning to England, it was my intention to reside in my native land, but found that I couldn't stand the climate, so I decided to go to South Africa. Leaving London in a cargo boat, we had hardly cleared Tilbury docks when we collided with another ship which we nearly cut in half. Our own bows were stove in and we had to return to the docks. The other ship was saved from sinking by grounding on the Thames bank. I then booked a passage by the Dutch line and had a pleasant voyage to the Cape, from where I went to Johannesburg. While there, I was engaged by the government to look for water in the famous Kruger National Park. The park is a wild beast reserve covering some 8,000 square miles. It encloses very few rivers and there are few animals which will walk more than 3 miles for their daily drink. Especially in the spring before the young are born. My job was to find additional water supplies. On arriving at the park, I was met by the head ranger. He began by informing me that the government would be interested only in those waters which were within a specified surface depth. I pointed out to him that the depth of the water was something over which I had no control, but nothing I could say had any effect. There was a great deal of rock in the reserve, so I expected trouble and got it. But my professional difficulties didn't destroy the thrill of being in the reserve among the wild animals living their natural lives. Very few of them could ever have seen a human being except perhaps an occasional native from one of the kraals in the reserve, who was foolish enough to be out at dusk, when the lions and other carnivora hunt and feed. Even these rash and foolish humans are seldom seen more than once. I was taken to a camp in the reserve. It consisted of a group of circular mud huts, rondavels, surrounded by a 7-foot fence of heavy wire netting, which looked a poor protection against lions, especially as there were huge dents here and there was some big animal fleeing from a lion or panther, had crashed into it. However, I was assured that it was much stronger than it looked, so I hoped for the best. The wet season was approaching, and the weather was dull, with intermittent showers of torrential rain. The day after my arrival was a Sunday, and I was sitting in my rondavel, which was very comfortable and well furnished, when I heard a noise which I shall never forget. It was the hunting cry of a lion and the blood-curdling scream of its kill. Lions usually only hunt at dusk, but, the weather being so dull and wet, they were hunting in the early afternoon. There was evidently a number of lions engaged in the hunt and, when that occurs, the pride surrounds a herd of deer or zebra at some distance away. They then gradually close in on the herd, the lions being on one side and the lionesses on the other, with their cubs behind them. One lion will then utter the hunting cry, which is a sort of hoarse cough, quite unlike a roar. The herd rush frantically from the sound, only to meet a similar cough from another lion. It then becomes a panic-stricken mass of animals fleeing in all directions, and every lion picks out a single beast, like a sheepdog separating a particular sheep from a flock, and drives it towards a lioness, who does the actual killing. The scream of the terrified animal, when it sees the lioness and realizes its fate, is too blood-curdling to be described. Those were the sounds I heard on that peaceful Sunday afternoon. Later on the same afternoon, the head ranger and one of his assistants came in a car to fetch me to see the pride of lions, which was quite close to the camp. It must have been a small kill, as the lions were all sitting up and cleaning themselves. The ranger explained that they always sleep after a meal and, the bigger the meal, the longer they sleep. Like the domestic cat, they are very careful of their personal cleanliness and are most fastidious about their coats. But their claws and teeth are coated with a rotting film from their prey, and even a scratch often causes death, especially to a native. The pride consisted of 2 lions with black manes, 2 lionesses and 5 or 6 half-grown cubs. The ranger stopped the car quite close to them, but kept the engine running as is always done in big game country, so that an immediate getaway can be made in case of emergency. But, as a rule, lions and other wild beasts seem to look upon the car as some sort of animal and show not the least fear of it. The smell of the petrol destroys the scent of humans. When the 2 black-maned lions saw the car, they came down the bank to investigate. We were moving very slowly and one trotted on each side of the car, so close that I could almost have touched them with my hand. Nervously I asked the ranger whether we couldn't have the windows shut as they were both wide open. The Doorscot merely asked, Why? To which I weakly replied, "Oh, I don't know. I only thought it might be safer." I had forgotten that no wild animal ever looks up above its own height. But the two lions were alarmingly close and their smell was overpowering. They ran in circles round the car and then one of them saw a white notice board nailed to a tree. He ambled across, ripped it off with his paw and sat down to chew it, like a dog with a bone, obviously showing off to this strange new animal the car. He then seemed to get a splinter in his tongue and began to shake his head and enormous mane. After that he decided to have some fun with his wife and children who were sitting on the road in front of the car. He ambled heavily up to them and gave the lady a playful little pat on the face, which would have killed a horse. Then followed a game of leapfrog, accompanied by the most alarming growls and snarls which, the younger ranger assured me were merely terms of endearment. While this game was in progress, the lions were getting nearer to the camp gates, which were open, so the head ranger remarked that we must get there first, and accelerated the car. This annoyed the lioness, who apparently thought the new animal was trying to interrupt her little flirtation, and tried to jump on the bonnet of the car as we passed. Fortunately, her timing was at fault, and she landed on the road. As she chose my side of the car for her jump and almost touched me as she fell, I wished more than ever that the windows had been shut. We reached the camp only a few moments ahead of the lions and the gates were quickly closed. The lions prowled around for a time and then went to sleep with their backs pressed against the wire netting. All cars entering the reserve have to pass through a gate where a fee of £1 is charged. Instructions are then given to the occupants as to when they must be back at the gate, as motoring in the reserve at dusk is considered unsafe. As I was there professionally and in charge of the chief ranger, I was often out during prohibited hours. Late one afternoon we were coming down a rough road with high elephant grass on each side, when a lioness with two very young cubs slipped noiselessly out of the grass and sat down in the middle of the road with her back to the car and the cubs beside her. In a minute or two she was joined by another lioness with 5 cubs. The two mothers sat close together wagging their heads, just like two old women gossiping, while the 7 babies came down the road to examine the car. One of them came onto the running board, put its front paws on the open window and looked in. It gazed at me with a little puzzled frown. It was the sweetest little thing, just like a big kitten, so I asked the ranger whether I might stroke it and received an emphatic no. One pat from its paw, he said, could rip the entire flesh from my arm, and a cry from me would bring the lioness on us. And that would be no joke, I can assure you. As he had been mauled by a lion, which he killed single-handed, losing part of one shoulder in the encounter, I thought he ought to know. Soon the lionesses got up and made funny noises to call their cubs and all, except one tiny cub faded into the undergrowth, as noiselessly as they had appeared. The tiny cub came back and sat in the middle of the road, close to the front of the car and spat and growled with amazing fury. Then, with a final growl and a swish of its little tufted tail, it followed its mother and vanished in the long grass. Every day there was some fresh thrill. All the various types of animals appeared to have their own particular habitat in the reserve. It was most interesting to see the perfect camouflage which nature has given them. I was once within a few yards of a giraffe in wooded country, but did not see it until it moved, despite its great bulk and height, its marking being so like the mottled sunshine filtering through the trees. Even the lion cubs born in the wilds of Africa are marked somewhat like a leopard to make them less visible in the undergrowth or possibly to appear more formidable to potential enemies. Yet cubs born in captivity are, like their parents, tawny all over and without markings. Zebras, whether black and white or golden brown and white, have markings to suit the type of country in which they live. They are undoubtedly among the best groomed animals in the reserve. They are sleek and plump, their coats shine like satin and they are always smartly turned out. The zebra foals are most attractive little creatures, so neat and dainty and the very image of their mothers. Being such beautiful animals, it is strange that there are often numbers of wildebeest in their herds, which look like a cross between an ill-kept domestic cow and an ugly buffalo. The elephants live in the north of the reserve and are savage and quite untamable. They are considered the most dangerous of the animals, after the treacherous buffaloes, the lions ranking only third. It is strange that the African elephant should be so unlike the Indian variety, which is easily tamed and extraordinarily intelligent, so much so that they are almost human in some of their ways. I have even known one cry. When I was in India, tiger shooting at the foot of the Himalayas, a special shoot was arranged for the governor of the province, and he and his retinue and 9 other guns were camped in a mango grove, ready for the big shoot on the following day. The elephants were drawn up in a semicircle, looking very smart with padded quilts on their backs, ornamented with embroidery and with long gilded tassels at the corners. Their faces had been painted with scrolls and patterns in many colors, and they all looked very gorgeous and pleased with themselves. But my elephant, a female named Moti, meaning a pearl, was swinging her trunk backwards and forwards, as elephants do when they are upset, and large tears were running down her face. I pointed this out to my cousin, who was host to the shooting party, and he spoke very severely to the mahout. When I asked him what was the matter, he explained that Moti was upset because she had not been dressed for the occasion, nor had her face painted. So, still weeping, she was taken back to the elephant lines behind the camp, and the shoot went on without her. I thoroughly enjoyed my visit to the game reserve, but, unfortunately, the animals did not benefit, as water was very hard to find, and what I did find was all deeper than the limit fixed by the government. End of part 20.